So as we touched on earlier, Maccabi Tel Aviv is sitting at the top of the standings, undefeated at 14-0. And even though Jerusalem did lose this round, they're still in comfortable position at 12-2. So we know that they both have strong rosters and they're both looking to compete for a championship this season, but anything can happen. What are some of the things you've seen, Darvis, that prevent a team that starts off strong in the season but doesn't end up completing that mission to win the championship?
Well, I think some of the things are, and possibly one of the biggest things are injuries. And, you can't really control injuries. You can do everything that you can to maybe prevent them. But if an injury is going to happen, it's going to happen. So I think one of the biggest things are the injuries. So they're having a great season so far right now, but you don't know what's going to happen in a few weeks. One of your key players could go down, and then you go from undefeated to maybe the middle of the pack because one of your players, key players, is injured. So I think injuries is a very monumental. It's a very big thing that you really don't have control over.
Right, and we don't see load management as popular in the international game as we do here in the States and watching NBA games. But, other than injuries, are there anything that you can think of that, will prevent a team from really having the perfect season? Some teams are really perfect during the regular season but don't win the championship. Is there anything that you can think of that prevents that?
I could also think the mental toughness of it. It's a marathon running. If you're not mentally prepared to, play your 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 games, then, you could easily lose focus of the goal at hand. Physically, your body might start breaking down, but you got to be mentally strong to push through those aches and pains and keep yourself in the game. As a team, the chemistry has to stay consistent throughout, and at some points, if you do lose a player, that next person has to step right in and keep that energy level high to make it through that season.
It's important to be mentally tough, as you mentioned. I think it's because if a player, goes down or needs to step up, you have to be mentally prepared to go from playing 15 minutes to playing 25 minutes, or going from scoring 10 points to your team needing 20 points. So although a lot of players are capable of it, physically, you do have to be mentally strong there. Mm-hmm. But something else we touched on earlier is having that best effort, throughout the playoffs. It doesn't always mean you're not prepared, but sometimes it can mean you had too much rest, or you're playing against a team that happens to just start clicking in the right time. So, different scenarios you can think of, in the playoffs that can just change a team's mindset and maybe bring them from a lower seed to one of the better teams.
Yeah, well, you kind of switch from basketball to football, and you think about what transpired this past weekend with the Baltimore Ravens, right? They're the number one seed in the AFC. They get 2 weeks off, and they end up losing the game, right? And so I think everyone expected them to kind of go to the Super Bowl and everything like that. We kick it back to basketball, and you just you always have to be ready. You always have to be ready. You can't undermine an opponent, whether it's another team that you're playing that's undefeated, or if it's a team that hasn't won a game yet. And you can bet your bottom dollar that team that hasn't won a game yet is hungry. They're definitely hungry for that, for that first win that possibly could get. So it's basically treating your competitor as, anybody can win on any given night, right? And so you just always want to be ready as a team, whether, you're in the middle of the pack, but definitely if you're undefeated, because teams are going to be watching for you and they're coming for you.
I think during the regular season, teams don't always put their 100% best effort forward, and, it's something that people don't want to hear, but, I think a team might cruise during the regular season to avoid injuries or avoid, those strains that you get into just from overuse of the muscles. Do you think that, having a team kind of turn it on and off is a good thing?
To me, that's kind of dangerous. unless you're confident in the players that you have on your team, then you might be able to get away with that. But if you're just turning it on and off, you might not know what person you might bring to the court that day. You might be off that game, and then all of a sudden you lose that game, and now all of a sudden you want to turn it on.
Definitely, yeah.
It's a little too unstable for me because you kind of want to find your identity early and stay consistent. If you're going to be a dominant team, be that dominant team. Don't take weeks off, because that's where you lose. When you get too confident, too comfortable, that's where you get snuck up from behind, and that other team that has been struggling finds their way late in the season. That team that gets hot at the right time.
Right.
They're the ones who's going to come in and hit you with that haymaker and knock you out that playoff race.
We've seen it throughout a season, throughout playoffs, but even in one game you can see that happen. A team gets too comfortable with a large lead, or they have bye weeks and say, we're going to comfortably beat this lower seed, and they get surprised.
Yeah,
they get beat by an underdog team, and it's because the lack of focus can be detrimental to a team sometimes. So I think it's important to always keep your foot on the gas. You have to always just give your best effort, in my opinion, no matter who you're playing against. But individually, you see players take that time off to avoid, I guess, the overuse. Do you think that also has a negative effect when it goes into the playoffs?
Well, I think it definitely does, because you've been playing all season and you kind of develop a rhythm, and now all of a sudden here we are. I've been playing with the same 4 guys in the same rotation, and now maybe 1 or 2 guys are like, you know what, I'm going to sit the next few games out, or I'm going to sit 2 games out, or whatever the case may be. They're not playing. Mm-hmm. So now you're playing in a rotation that you're not really used to, and you get to the playoffs, and I think it disrupts it a little bit, because you're playing with people that you're not possibly used to playing with. And then, especially late in the season, if you're talking about resting, you haven't played with these guys for a few games, and you might practice, but then you get to the playoffs, and playoffs is a completely different type of animal, You haven't played with these guys for a few games, and all of a sudden you're playing with them again, and it's like maybe that person's not where they're supposed to be at a certain time when they probably would have been there before earlier in the season. You know what I mean? And I think it just throws off. If you can play. You know what I mean? And that's just how I feel about that.
So being able to, have numerous players that can fill into that roster spot is rare. We've seen it with some teams, like the New England Patriots are one team that comes to mind, but also Maccabi Tel Aviv is doing that right now. And it's also something we've seen in basketball with the San Antonio Spurs.
Yep.
Before this year. We've seen them be able to continue clicking no matter who was playing that position. And it's rare to see, but it is something that's special when that chemistry is that strong. But we'll still continue to monitor Maccabi Tel Aviv and see how their season is progressing. But we expect them to finish strong throughout the season. Maybe not undefeated, but we do expect to see them finishing towards the top. And we expect Jerusalem to be there as well. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next week.